Hi guys, this is Luca from Lampariello.com, and I'm very pleased to be here with Lamont from the channel Days of French and Swedish. Hi Lamont, how's it going?
Good, thanks, buddy. How are you?
Good, good. How's it going down under? Because you're in Australia, right?
Yes, it is spring and it is very wet and but a nice temperature. But yeah, it's going well.
Fine, fantastic. So, Lamont is a very interesting guy. He talks about language learning on his channel, but also about other things, and he's got a very interesting vision and perspective on language learning, and not only on language learning. So, if you haven't started following his channel yet, you should do that. Without further ado, let's get started. Let's dive in the interview. This is going to be, we're going to cover some interesting topics, hopefully interesting for you about language learning and not just about language learning. So let's get started. I have a list of questions here. The first question is, Lamont, how has language learning impacted your life? Let's say, how has language learning, second language acquisition, language learning in general, changed the way you live, the way you learn, the way you act?
Um, it it's almost like how has it not impacted my life would be a much quicker question to answer because for whatever reason, until I was like 30, I just didn't do any kind of anything that was difficult at all. Like I just didn't I never got up early. I never worked on anything. I never pursued anything creative. I just expected the whole world to just come to me, and I just for some reason one day is a short way to say it. I started learning Swedish, and I guess the thing that's interesting about learning foreign languages is that you're never very good at it. And like even if you are very good at it, you're actually not nearly as good as a native speaker normally. So I think at the end of my first year of Swedish, I sort of realized, okay, this takes really deliberate effort. Like unless I'm just going to give this up, like I have everything else, I need to really focus on this, and I need to start thinking about how I spend my time. Like because I could do this or this. Yeah, so everyone could do anything, but if I'm going to get good at this, I need to think about what parts of my day I'm using, like when am I most awake, um, and how to use that time valuably. And then with YouTube, which came a year or so after that, it the same thing. So I started talking about language learning on YouTube, but doing language learning and doing YouTube, and like I keep sort of adding every time I get a little bit comfortable. I add something, and so it's just completely changed how I do everything in terms of I'm very deliberate now. I'm always trying to move towards some goal, and I wasn't at all in my 20s, like just not even slightly. So whether it was language learning or whether it was just going to happen anyway, that's how it's impacted me.
So you thought that before you seriously started learning languages, you thought that um, you would just get to it and you would learn the language just by getting exposed to the language itself? Or was that what you were thinking in general?
Uh, no, I do you mean no, I didn't take it seriously at all. I didn't really take anything seriously. I never put any effort into anything because with putting effort into something comes the risk that you might fail. So
Hmm.
everything that I started to get a little bit good at, I would leave probably for that reason. I didn't know that at the time, of course, but I'd
Hmm.
probably as soon as I started to get a little bit good, you start having this pressure and this expectation of yourself, and I would leave it alone. And for some reason, with language learning, maybe because I started talking about it on YouTube, I don't know. I thought, hang on, I need to actually do this deliberately. I can either go, or I can go back and pursue something else that I've been semi into in the past, like music or something. Um,
Hmm.
but I sort of decided to focus more on languages. But I know I didn't really believe that I had it in me to learn a foreign language. Um, Not because like talent, I just didn't. I didn't think that I had the stuff, like the grit. Um, So I
Mhm.
guess it was sort of an experiment to see if I really could do it. Yeah.
Very interesting. You used a couple of interesting words here, which are grit, and then you talked about learning deliberately. What do you mean by learning deliberately, and how does that impact language learning? Now, I know we're opening a can of worms here,
Hmm.
but I've been watching a lot of videos and reading a lot of books about second language acquisition, and I guess you've done also some research on that. And there is this comprehensible hypothesis, right, that if you get exposed to content that is both compelling and understandable, then you're going to basically learn the language. But deliberate practice is something where you have to sit and deliberately engage in activities where you're focused and you aim at something specific. So do you think that deliberate practice is that important to language learning, or do you think, well, if you expose yourself to the right stuff and you do the right things and you talk to people, then you're inevitably going to learn the language anyway? I know that this is opening a can of
Mm.
worms, but you know,
I think that mostly you're going to get quite good if you just expose yourself to enough of the language and have conversations, even every now and then. I don't think they need to be regular. And I think that most Western Europeans from countries like Germany and Denmark and Sweden and stuff are basic basically proof of this in English, in that most of them can speak very, very good English, and a lot of them haven't had that much deliberate kind of practice on it. But um, I guess, first of all, I was actually talking more about the fact that I didn't I didn't even have a goal to do with anything, so I didn't deliberately spend.
mm,
Even if we say, okay, it's all just passive and you can just watch compelling input, uh, I wouldn't have watched anything before unless I wanted to watch it. Basically, if it was in a foreign language, then I wasn't watching it to learn the language. I was just watching it because I wanted to watch it. Like, I watched The Bridge a
mhm.
couple of times, but that's just because I liked it. It's not because I wanted to learn Swedish or Danish. I couldn't have even told you that those two languages were different before I was into languages. Um, so I more meant the, like, having a deliberate approach to my life, as opposed. But now I'm only really just getting into the realm of deliberate practice, because I would say that I've only now come to the point where that's what's going to improve my Swedish. Before, I'd say just my exposure to Swedish had not been enough. And it's only, I've really only changed my view on this in the last kind of 18 months or so. I used to be trying to learn the language very like it was maths, like,
Mhm.
and put this here and put this here, and then try to assemble that as I speak. And it's only in the last 18 months that I've just thought, no, I've just got to get Swedish streaming through my brain all the time.
Gotcha. Thanks for the answer. One observation is that you were talking about The Bridge. The Bridge is a TV series, both in Swedish and in Danish. I think it's 60% in Swedish and 40% in Danish. It talks about
Roughly.
something that happened on this bridge that connects the two countries. And it's a very interesting show. I watched some of it. I don't know if you've watched the entire series. And if I hadn't known, like back in the day, I would have
Mm.
thought Danish was some kind of weird Swedish because they
Mm.
speak both languages and you get
Yeah.
confused. Anyway,
It's
just
unrealistic how much they, in the
yeah,
show, how much they can understand each other. In real life, they use a lot more English than in that show. But
absolutely. Especially because Swedes have a hard time understanding Danes, and Danes understand Swedish much better.
mm,
But we're going to talk about that another time. So one thing that really struck me, because I've been binge watching your videos lately, because I find them very interesting, is that you said something that struck me and that happened to me as well. Let's talk about deliberate practice and simple practice. I distinguish these two modes of learning, right? You do
mm,
something just for the sake of doing it, as if you were doing it in your native language, like reading something for the sake of it or watching a movie just for the fun of it. You said that you had been doing at the beginning. I remember you talked about it in a video about the comprehensible input. You said that you were an advocate of the more I speak from the very beginning. And tell me if I got it right. You thought maybe a couple of years ago that the more you engage in conversations, the better and faster you're going to learn. But then you realize that after a lot of conversations, your level was kind of stalling. Is that correct?
That's right.
That's what happened to me. I just realized, okay, well, I talked to my two Hungarian tutors, and my level just stalled, and
Mm.
I realized that I need more input. So the main idea that I always tell my students, and let me know what you think about it, is that no matter what happens, input still remains the most important, the most powerful source of of improvement. Let's put it this way, because anything that you do on top of that, like deliberate practice, is fantastic, right? Especially at this stage where you get a B2 and you want to move to a higher level.
Mhm.
But don't you think that input should be the main, let's say, the foundation of your second language acquisition of language learning, um, especially at the beginning?
I do, but I think a lot of people are very. I do think that, and I think a lot of people are very. I don't know. They even just the sound of like the input hypothesis or whatever. They get very caught up in like labels, and they go like, oh
Yeah.
no, but you also need to speak and stuff. And it's like, yes, you do also need to speak, especially if you want to be really good and you want to be able to express yourself very fluently. Like for example, Luca in English, he
Mhm.
doesn't he's much more fluent than I am in Swedish because he's outputted a lot, but he's done that on top of this input. He's got this subconscious understanding of how English works to the point that when
Mhm.
he comes to express a meaning, he doesn't need to think, oh, but what about do they conjugate this verb with that verb or with this person or what's going on here? It just all just flows out, and that, in my experience, takes a lot of input. And it didn't matter how much Swedish I spoke because I used to speak a lot, like a lot, every day for an hour generally. It didn't matter how much I did that. I was always kind of assembling the language as I went and going, oh, now I need to say this and now I need to say this.
Mhm.
And not only does that not sound very Swedish, but it also never really gets you any further. Like you've basically you can only say things that you've said before.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's absolutely true. It's implicit and explicit learning. So when you're
Mm.
thinking, consciously thinking, what kind of grammar structures am I using? It's really difficult to do it on the fly when you're talking to someone. So
Mm.
I believe that you learn language both implicitly, explicitly. I recently found a very, very interesting presentation by a Japanese linguist on YouTube. I would put the link in the description box, where he talks at length about all the models that we have. For example, Krashen's model, and he talks about the fact that now that model is kind of old with respect to other things. And I do believe, by watching the video, realized that actually my vision of things is that you mainly learn languages implicitly, but you also have to learn them explicitly, and you need the right balance. And this balance depends on the phase. It's a very interesting video. I
Mm.
recommend you to watch it. I'll send
Mm.
it to you. But fundamentally, just to address this question, from my perspective, is that you need both. You need to have a lot of input and learn implicitly, but if you want to get really good past the so-called B2 level where you can interact with other people and you know the language fluently, you speak it fluently, you need to do something else. You need to engage in deliberate practice. Come to think of it, um, that's what you've done in your native language, right, Lamont? I mean, you've been speaking with people, you've been learning English within your family and with your, but then you've learned to read and write at school.
Mm.
So, you've done a number of things that you would not normally do in your real life if you're learning a foreign language, say Swedish. Have you written dissertations, of given presentations in Swedish?
I'm still sort of deciding which of those routes I want to go down. But I'm starting to do more difficult things. I started to slowly translate a book from English to Swedish, um,
Hmm.
and I'm having that checked by a teacher. I'm not just assuming that I'm right. But yeah, that sort of stuff. If I'm being brutally honest with my level, I think it's probably at around a obviously it's not as fluent, but
Hmm.
it's around the mental level of an early, what we in Australia would call high school. So like 10, 11, 12 years old. It's that's about as what's the word, eloquently as I can express myself in Swedish. So I need to think about what a 10, 11, 12, 13 year old would do at school. Um,
Interesting.
so I'm probably not quite up to dissertations and things. Yeah, I mean, I could attempt that, but I think that would be at the point where the difficulty is a little bit inefficient because I would be spending so much time thinking, oh, what's this? And yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, so you
mm,
need some deliberate practice, right?
absolutely.
To go to the upper level. Because
Yeah.
I recently watched an interview where Krashen talks about the fact that you need just to get input as much as you can, and then output doesn't serve the purpose. I do believe, well, I do believe that he has a point when it comes to input, the so-called input hypothesis, meaning the more exposure input you get, the better or the merrier. I also believe that in the power of deliberate practice, and I will put a couple of links in the description box if you want to know more about the concept of deliberate practice. And there's a lot of interesting research on that.
Mm.
Okay, now onto the next question. Um, how does physical? I don't know if you like, working out, running, swimming, any physical activity, and how does that impact your life? And like, does it have any role in language learning? Do you do any activities? I don't know, when you're working out, do you listen to languages when you go running? Maybe in Australia it's too hot to run in the summer. I don't know.
It is often too hot to run in the summer, but I used to run quite a lot. I haven't. I don't exercise as much as I would like to, but I'm trying to actually set up my house so that even when it's hot, I can get on an exercise bike and be like watching a series. Because yeah, I want to be learning a language whilst exercising, and uh, I think that exercise is really important. I must admit that
Mhm.
I'm at the moment I'm not great at convincing myself to do it, but at the very least I do walk with audiobooks on, um, and then occasionally I just change it up and just go for a walk or a run with nothing in my ears, and that's quite refreshing. But I think when I do that all the time, I used to never have anything in my ears when I ran, and then that got kind of boring. And then I
Mhm.
started listening to audiobooks, and now when I don't do that, it's a nice change. So there's ways that you can vary your routine. But I mean, as language learners, I guess we would value our mental strength, like our brains, our intellectual capacity. Um, but that can't happen without the body. Like you're
Mhm.
not just like a head in a jar. So you need to keep your body healthy. But I I'm not the best. I will admit that. Just before Luca and I were discussing that we don't always treat our bodies the way that we would ideally like to. I don't,
Yeah.
how about you?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm finding it a little bit difficult to do physical exercise working out. Especially these days, there's a big friction in starting. Like everything, the most difficult part is actually in
Mm,
starting. So you have to set up the environment so that it kind of, um, helps you get started. I'm finding it difficult these days to do that, even though, truth be told, the weather is great, for example, for running, because I love running. I've been running for the last 20 years or something. But now, because of the kidney stone that I have, I had, this little problem in the summer, still have it. It's more difficult. I try to run, but after a couple of minutes, my back hurts, unfortunately. So
mm,
still have to go to the doctor, but that's a different matter.
mm,
But when I do physical exercise, when I run, I have to say that I'm not a fan of listening to language podcasts while I'm running. I always connect running with music if I have to listen to music. If I have to go to the park, I will listen to music. But I've established this simple rule that the last 10 minutes of my running session is dedicated to language learning. So when I go back home, when I'm on my way back home for 10 or 15 minutes, I will listen to a podcast. and I have connected working out. The working out session is always connected with Polish. So every time that I do a workout session, I'm doing, for example, I'm listening to music because it helps me, with movement. I get excited. But then every time I take a shower, if I don't have to, for example, wash my hair, I have the AirPods, which allows me to listen to a Polish podcast, and then when I groom and I do other stuff, space and the time and the activity dedicated to listening to podcasts in Polish. So I've connected a number of activities either before the running or the working out session, and after that where I spend time especially listening to languages that I have, let's say, at a B1, B2 level. So listening is, once you get to the level, it's very easy to connect with other things.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but also when you engage in physical activity, then you're in a good mood after that. You're full of endorphins, whatever they call them. So it's very beneficial for me. It clears my mind. For me, running is a sort of motivation. You're just out there, out and about, and you're just enjoying nature, and it helps me also with language learning in general. It's important to do it, but sometimes we know that we have to do stuff, but it's difficult.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for the answer. We have a couple of more questions here. So, are you an organized person? Have you become an organized person? What about getting your life organized, and how has language learning impacted that, if it has, in general? Do you have a very structured day? You're more like, hey, let's do whatever comes.
I'm more organized than I used to be. I wouldn't say that I'm an organized person overall. Luca and I were supposed to meet a year ago. And we haven't been so disorganized that it's taken a year to make this happen. But we were supposed to meet a year ago, and I got the day wrong, and I went to the movies when I was supposed to meet with Luca. So I definitely wouldn't call myself an organized person. And with regard to organizing my day, no, not really. I'm going to say no. I'm not an organized person. I was more organized when I was working a 9 to 5, and I would generally have to get to work at about 7 o'clock. So it was actually more like a 7 to midday or 7 to 1 job. I was organized then, and I ironically actually spent a little bit more time learning languages then, because I always had an hour trip each way. The short answer is no. I'm always productive. I'm a productive person. I'm not always organized in how I do that. Sometimes I'm editing videos at 1 in the morning. Other times I'm still watching a series in Swedish at 1 in the morning. I'm never doing nothing, which is good, but I'm never doing the same thing at the same time of day, if that's what you call organized. And the reason that one of the many reasons that I'm standing is that the ceiling is much cleaner than the floor. So
Gotcha.
I know Luke's answer to this, but
yeah. I'm not gonna delve into that much when it comes to my organization. I'm probably gonna make a video about that. Actually, I would still have to publish it. I'm kind of an organized person, so I always have like blocks of time during the day, and it serves me well. But you don't have to be that organized. I remember the people who take a look at my calendar go like, "Oh my God, how do you live like that?"
Yeah.
But I believe that there's this kind of stereotype that if you plan everything, then your life doesn't have flexibility anymore. I don't believe that. It can give you more flexibility if you know how to do it. So I've become more flexible with time. I understood that if you block every single minute, your plans or your plan never goes exactly as you had planned. So I've learned to be structured, but also to give, to give space, to create space for more stuff, in case plan B and everything else. Okay, one last question before we get into the Q&A, because you guys asked a lot of interesting questions. You want to keep it, we want to keep this video relatively acceptably, at an acceptable length, so to speak. Let's talk about motivation in general, and motivation in language learning. what do you do to stay motivated? Like, you've been learning Swedish for how long? Have you been learning Swedish, more or less?
Almost 5 years total. I would say 2 years of that I was reasonably focused on French, like more focused on French than
Hmm.
on Swedish. But 18 months now, just Swedish.
Okay.
So
Have you had a, how have you kept the motivation so high? Have you had any motivation dip, and do you have any tips or pieces of advice for those who get unmotivated in, in the long path, along the long path of language learning?
hmm. I've got a few that are like you can take or leave. One of them is that I've got all these like series I want to watch, books I want to read, like series either in Swedish or like actually a kids show, but like a good kids show dubbed into Swedish, and books I want to read. So I just generally just go the next thing, the next thing. So I finish one book and I just say, oh, I really wanted to read that book. So the hard part now is deciding when to stop that and to go back to French, because I do want to do that at some point too. Um, I'm looking over here at my bookshelf. That's one thing, is just to have these tasks and to see that as the value in itself, but that doesn't always work. Um, Another one is like, I think it's sometimes called the paperclip method, by some salesman who had like a jar of paperclips on his desk,
Hmm.
and so that he could see how many sales calls he was making, he would just move one paperclip to the other jar every morning, and until he was done, and that was the thing. So not worrying about the results so much, like am I not worrying, oh, am I getting better at Swedish? Have I reached this milestone? Because milestones are very hard to measure in language learning.
Hmm.
So I'm doing like a really big version of that with these seeds that I have in a little jar, where every hour of Swedish I do, whether it's input, output, deliberate practice, anything, and every hour I spend on Swedish, I move a seed over. Um, and I know that when I've finished that thing of seeds, my Swedish will be a lot better than it is now. So, and that's what I want. I don't know. I can't measure a thing of how good it'll
Hmm.
be. Or, um, that's that's my tips. But you're going to have dips in motivation, and um,
Hmm.
yeah, that's okay. I guess is what I want to say.
I think it's normal to have dip in motivation. Sometimes you tell yourself, what the heck am I doing? Why am I doing that? Right? So my very short piece of advice is that when that happens, I think you should focus more on the steps rather than thinking about the peak of the mountain. Because if you're
Mm,
constantly thinking on when am I going to get there, and you focus too much on goals, then you lose sight of the systems that make those goals, reaching those goals possible. And I
mm,
believe that that's the first thing. And the second thing is that if you get unmotivated, you're doing something wrong, and you should change the way you learn, whether
mm,
the material you're engaging in or the way you're doing it. I think that plays a role.
mm.
So thank you, Lamont. This was very interesting. And now let's start with some of the questions that I have here. I
Yep.
don't have my contact lenses, so I let's take a look at the first question. So Pepe's World, is it normal when learning a language to have difficulty understanding accents you're not used to? I've been learning Spanish for about 3 years now, and sometimes it's not easy for me to understand certain accents. What's your short answer to that?
Short answer is yes, very normal. 3 years is not even that long unless you've been going like all Spanish all the time kind of thing. You 3 years, you shouldn't be expected to be an expert on all the languages that exist, especially in Spanish. There's got to be hundreds. Um,
Mhm.
and also that I wouldn't, in the first kind of, well, the first stages, up until a B2 level even, it would be ideal if you didn't have too much exposure to different accents and you focused on one accent, because I still struggle to understand Norwegian, which I guess you could consider like an extreme accent of Swedish.
Mhm.
So that's, yeah.
I fully agree. I fully agree with Lamont. I think you should stick to one accent when you start, and then if you don't understand accents within the Spanish world, it's pretty normal. I think the Chilean accent, from Chile is infamous for being very difficult if you haven't been exposed to that. So it's completely normal. Don't worry about it. Just keep getting exposed to the language as much as you can. And then if you want to understand a specific accent, then get exposed to that accent and you will understand it in no time. So, Brew BF, sorry for butchering your name. I can't really see it here. I'm a B2/C1 level in English. I'm at B2/C1 level in English. I'm currently doing some bidirectional translations for a few weeks. However, I feel I'm in the intermediate plateau, and is it really difficult to measure my progress in English? How can I overcome that? You were saying that before. How can you measure actually the progress in a complex skill such as second language acquisition, acquiring a second language?
Well, Luca might disagree with me on this, but I would say to not really worry about measuring it because I think it's very difficult to measure. Like I was saying before, that a Swedish 10-year-old is much more fluent than I am, but I would probably do better on an exam meant for university students or
Mhm.
something because they're totally different skill sets. So I I wouldn't worry so much about it's very hard to measure who whether you've gotten good at a language or whatever. So at that level, if you really are B2 to C1, especially if C1, I would worry about developing specific skills that you would like to have. So if you would like to be really good at talking about technology or IT or uh, global warming or the climate in general or something, then develop that skill and don't worry so much about how good you are at English as a whole.
I think, Lamont, I don't disagree at all with you. I
Okay.
agree. I agree with everything. The only thing I would add in this regard is I don't know if you ever heard of a book which is really interesting, which is called Measure What Matters. And language learning is indeed a complex skill that is difficult to measure. I think that if you can measure something, it could be, for example, the amount of hours you spend or what you do. You can measure. There are some things that you can measure. You can put in numbers if it helps you, if it gives you a sense of direction. And what I normally do is that I actually do not measure my skills because it's really difficult. But I do two things. First of all, I keep a journal where I write what I do every day and the amount of time that I spend engaging in these activities, like for example in Greek and Hungarian. But I also write on and off comments that where when I have eureka moments. So you can't as I said before, you can't really measure progress, but you can write sometimes, oh, I actually started understanding words in a movie. I remember when I was watching, um, I don't remember exactly now the name of the movie. I think you probably know it. It's a movie about it's a funny movie about the police in Sweden and
Cops.
cops, and
Cops.
the main actor, I think he's from Lebanon. He made he made another movie before that I really liked. That was the very first movie that I watched together with. Sorry guys, this is in the first word is the F word in English, but it's the name of the thing is it's called fucking Åmål,
Cornwall. Mm.
which was a movie that marked me when I watched it. I remember back in the day, I found the script in Swedish and I was going through the entire script. Anyway, eureka moments where you suddenly understand stuff. I remember I started watching it after a year learning the language, and I said, "Oh my God, I actually understand what they're saying." And so I think if you keep track of the amount of time that you spend or the activities that you are engaging in, and you jot down some comments on and off on how you're doing things, if you can improve them, or eureka moments, that's an indirect way of measuring your progress because measuring something like language learning is really difficult, at least directly in terms of numbers. That's what I think. Um, so, how important do you, this is Beyond the Basics in Polish, interesting name. How important do you find the process of constructing your own sentences rather than being spoon-fed ones through texts and apps? Or does it matter? Is seeing the words on the page enough, or do we need to actively be training our ability to translate without any crutches slash visual aids?
I was a little bit confused by this question because the end of it seems to imply that when we're speaking, we would be translating, uh,
Hmm.
or maybe he means because I know this guy sort of I know who he is. Maybe he means that when we're writing. I I don't know because outputting, I would be trying to avoid translating, and if
Mhm.
there's still if you feel a need to translate, um, then I would say you probably need more input. I don't. My experience with it is that just a very input weighted blend of input and speaking means that you will produce your own sentences that are still correct, um,
Mhm.
and still sound like what a native would say. So yes, I think I don't think seeing the words on the page, but hearing the words in your ears and seeing the words on the page, I think that is enough. But I think most people significantly underestimate how much you need.
Agreed. For me, in language learning, it's neither this or that. It's
Mm.
this and that. So, if I may, I would say that it's important to get exposed to a number of sentences, the more the merrier. But then what I normally do, just to give you an example, is I take a piece of content that can be a text and a podcast, then I take specific words or actually fragments of that podcast, they put them into a notebook. Gonna make a video about that because people have been asking me, and then I basically make sure that I write fragments that are flexible enough so that I can create my own sentences. So I bridge the two worlds. I expose myself to sentences within a specific context. I get them out of the page, so to speak, and I transfer the information into a notebook, and then I use them to have a meaningful conversation either with myself or a tutor telling about the content of the podcast so that I can, I get the best of both worlds, so to speak. But again, I would get exposed to a lot of, of the language, and the
Mm.
more the merrier. Um, Language guide Elena or Elena, that would be the Italian pronunciation. That's my
Mm.
sister's name, Elena. Do you think it's possible to learn a language if you wear many hats in life, like being a mother, working at home, parents, etc., etc.? Being a parent, blah blah blah.
Mm. I really liked this question, because I think it acknowledges the reality that it's very difficult. It's not. I think there's a lot of uh, talk out there. I don't want to mention anyone specifically, but I think there's a lot of this idea. It's like, oh, you can do it if you put your mind to it, and you can, but there is actually a reality to your life.
Hmm.
Um, and I found, we were talking before about organization. I found that I need to be as organized as my life is complex. So back when I first started learning Swedish, I did heaps. I did like 3 or 4 hours a day, and I did that with ease because I didn't have anything else that I was really doing. You could say I I was a loser. I didn't have anything going on, so I was just learning Swedish. But now I will freely admit, I spend a lot of time making videos. If it was totally up to me, I would just learn languages for like 8 hours a day. But I have a living to make and everything, so I'd spend a lot of time making videos. I also have 2 kids. I You need to be very deliberate with your time, um,
Hmm.
and it's possible. I think when you're not as good as you could be in terms of being deliberate with your time, it you feel like you're in this permanent place of like feeling like I'm getting the most out of my time that I possibly could be. But then like when I saw Luca's timetable, I was like, what the heck is going on? The first time we met, he ran straight from speaking to me straight to a Danish lesson, and I was like, this guy really has completely filled his life with stuff that he's doing. So I think that you can, but it is difficult, um, and you also need to set up systems that work. So, for example, I'm trying to raise, well, especially my younger son. My older son's, it's a bit late for me to raise him now, but he also watches with us. We watch stuff in Swedish, so I raise my younger son in Swedish as much as I can, which then gives me time in Swedish as well.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I certainly wouldn't get as much Swedish as I do if I hadn't have made that choice. So you've got to put in realistic things. And also I've dropped, like, I don't read in English anymore. People give me books One person in particular gives me a lot of books. They're like, oh, I think you'll enjoy this. And I'm like, I'm not going to read that because it's in English. So I even read the stuff that Luca's recommending now, like stuff like Atomic Habits and whatnot. I'll read that in Swedish as well. Um,
Fantastic. Great.
yeah.
Great. Just if I can chime in,
Mm.
it's difficult. It's difficult, especially if you have a family, but I believe you can always squeeze in 10 minutes if you can. For example, I have an American student of mine. She's traveling all around the world. She has two kids, so she's very busy, but at the same time, we started talking about it, and she realized that it's about making it a priority, language learning, if it's a priority for you. So she makes the sacrifice, quote unquote, of waking up earlier when kids are still sleeping, and then she puts in the time. But it's difficult in the long run, and I do understand. You have to work on systems, and you have to be consistent. If you really want it, that's at the end of the day, you have to you have to want it in the
Yeah.
long run. That's a difficult part.
Yeah.
Um, so this is another really interesting question this is a difficult, Ciladrian, I'm not sure. How to get over the feeling of being stuck. I study an hour every day, but I feel like I'm not making any progress or I'm not progressing as quickly as I would like. This is a very, very common question. Like, how do I
Mm.
get unstuck when I got stuck? You know?
I guess it would depend. I would need to know more details about what you mean by stuck, but it sounds to me like pretty common plateau kind of thing, whether it's the intermediate plateau or the advanced plateau. And that's why I would just do something like the paperclip method. I would just say you're going to do like you're going to do another 100 hours in the next 3 months, so just a bit over an hour a day, or like, and it's you can't really not get better if
Hmm.
unless you're like C2 already and you're trying to get very specifically better, which I doubt. Then if you just keep doing an hour every day, you will get better. I don't think anyone progresses as fast uh, as they feel like they should. Like I've just been experimenting in a new language in like the last 2 days, really, because I'm testing this app, and so I was testing it with a new language, and it's so exciting because I see like literally every word I've never seen before. But
Hmm.
I've at the time that you see them, I'm like, oh, I could learn that and I could learn that. Oh, this language is easy if you just learn like these thousands of words that I'm seeing that I've never seen before. Then I'd speak the language. But it's realistically you just can't take in more than maybe at this stage 15, 20 words a day, or for you it might be 8 words a day because you're already more advanced. I don't know, but it's no one. I don't think anyone's out there thinking, "Yeah, I'm smashing this. I'm going to be where I want to be in a month's time." It just takes a long time, and I think the
Agreed.
less you worry about how long it takes, the faster you go. Like I've sort of started relaxing about my Swedish recently, and I had a lesson the other night, and it was flowing out like never before. I don't know what it was, but
Get into the flow and relax. Stop
mm,
thinking about it. Stop
yeah.
fretting about it.
Yeah, but it's a
Um,
very hard answer to accept to just stop thinking about it. But
no, that's fair enough. Actually,
mm,
it's a very actually complex answer to answer. It would take quite a long
mm,
time to answer properly. Now we
mm,
want to cover other questions because we're running out of time here. But you know uh, to to be concise, to make a long story short, for me, it's like when you want to lose weight, you take a look at yourself in the mirror and you don't see any change day by day, but actually you do. So you should stop worrying about it, focus on the system, and most of all, as I said before, make sure that you reflect upon your language learning. What am I doing? Are you doing it correctly? Are you doing
mm,
things automatically? Are you doing things just because you heard that these things need to be done at this stage? So take your language learning in your hands. Think about what works for you because everyone is slightly different or
mm,
different, and then you will make progress if you put in the work and if you think long term.
mm.
So here's a few questions from YouTube. So we cover some questions from Instagram. Let me see. This is a very long question. I'll read the first part of it. By day the 13th, interesting name. Would you guys say it's beneficial to just listen to the sounds of a language that you want to learn for a period of time before even getting into actually trying to learn and understand the language? So, for example, you would simply listen to your target language for about 6 months for a year. get accustomed to the sounds of the language, and only then get into the language. I do wonder if it would lead to better results in the long run. An interesting question.
I've heard anecdotes that it does. So there, I spoke to one Swedish guy who said that the only non-native Swedish speaker he'd ever met who sounded like a native, that's a very, very big call. The only one he'd ever met did that. He just listened to Swedish for like 6 months without ever actually attempting to speak it, and then started moving towards actually learning how the language works. And but even Matt versus Japan, who's like, pretty extreme in his methodology, even he said, well, that's a pretty, like, you've really got to have faith that that's going to work if you're going to attempt that. Because, okay, it's not a big deal to just listen to a language for 6 months if you're not doing anything else. But if I'm not totally positive that's going to work, then I'm probably going to try actually understanding it and everything. I certainly think it's kind of an extreme version of the input hypothesis, or the input heavy version. It's whether you could cope with that, and whether you would be okay if that maybe didn't work out the way you'd hoped. I don't know.
Fair enough. I agree with you. So I don't need to add anything else. I think you should start learning the language. As far as I'm concerned, you can listen to the language maybe for 1 week or 2 weeks, but then, you are an adult, you can actually use scripts and etc. So that's what I would do. I get into it immediately, but to each his own, as they say. So what is B2 for you? I think we covered that, but we use maybe we're getting into this is opening a can of this is instinct. What is B2 for you? How do you know that you're good enough in one language that it can become maintenance phase, and you can start a new one? This is what she literally wrote. This is an interesting question. How do you know, okay, now I'm good enough that I can just maintain the language?
I really don't know. I'm not good at this because I'm working on that right now. Like, as we speak, I'm working on is this a good time for me to go back to French? And I'm pretty confident that my Swedish is at C1. Like, in terms of measuring, there's certain things you can measure and go, do I tick that box? Do I tick that box? I'm pretty confident that my Swedish is at C1. But still, I feel when I compare my Swedish to my English, I think, well, it's not very good, and it makes me want to get better at Swedish. So I don't know, but I know some people have these things like, could you learn? I think Richard Simcott has said, could you learn? He calls it like a stable language or a base language or something. Anchor language. That's it.
Yeah.
One of the measures of it is, could you learn a third language, or whatever language you're up to, through that language? But Luca would know more about this than me, because he has languages at like various levels. I just have Swedish and English, really. So,
in my case, I think it's just when you feel it, meaning that, again, it's difficult to gauge exactly your skills. So when I feel like I can do certain things, like I can have a conversation with people on the street, or I can start understanding movies, or I can start understanding the content of podcasts that are relatively complex, that's a moment where I think I can start maintaining a language, at least by listening to it. It's a complex question to answer. So the short version is that when you feel it, when you're able to do certain things like understanding the language more or less around you without the aid of a script or visual aids like subtitles, and when you start engaging in conversation, so you feel confident enough, that's the moment where I feel like I can actually start getting into maintenance mode if I want to, or just to get into deliberate practice and keep improving. This is a very short answer. It takes more time, but we're running out of time. I wanted to go through one last question here. We have more questions, guys. Sorry for not covering all of them, but it's just a matter of time. If you're interested, we can always make another video with Lamont. How much time do you spend per day listening to and reading a language as you are in the process of learning as you are in the process of learning it. I'm doing about 30 minutes of listening without taking notes and 10 minutes of listening and taking notes with harder material. Is that enough?
I think that's actually pretty good at first, because I have this theory that it's not, if you just throw in like 6 hours a day at the start, then a lot of that goes to waste, because you
Hmm.
a lot of that time is you spent your brain just like filtering out things that it can't it can't your brain that those things are important, because it's like you just can't learn that quickly. So if you throw in 6 hours a day of input, for example, it might actually work out to an hour and a half a day that your brain actually can take any of that in. So 30 to 40 minutes, especially if 30 minutes of those are like that you're doing something deliberate and trying to learn new things, I think is good. I think after a while, when you start being able to understand things to a certain extent without any aid, just hearing it, or just reading it, then it's good to try to step that up. One, just to make the language more a part of your life, but two, because you're trying to sort of override some base assumptions that especially if this is your first foreign language, you're trying to override these kind of assumptions that, like, oh, this is how words go together, this is how it works in English, so this must be how it works in whatever you're trying to learn. Um, and and just a ton of like, it's not impossible for everyone, but bombarding your brain with the language once you reach a certain level, maybe B1, I think is a good idea if it's possible. And that's
Yeah.
why if you learn a fair bit before you, say, move to the country, then you generally end up speaking the language well. But if you don't learn anything before you move to the country, and then you might get in a situation where you just speak English all the time.
Okay, great, fantastic, great answer. My very short answer to that is you have to ask yourself, is that enough for you? Like, there's no good enough, or,
Mm.
the more the merrier, but then you have to be realistic with your time and energy. If you can
Mm.
do 30 minutes, that's great. 30 minutes a day. I think the most important thing is frequency, doing it every day. If you can do it 15, 30 minutes, that's great. If you can do it a little bit more, that's even better. You get there
Mm.
faster. But the
Yep.
more important thing is do it every day and get exposed to interesting and compelling content. Thank you so much, Lamont. It's been great to have you.
Thank you,
Where can
Luca.
people find you?
They can find me at youtube.com/days of French in Swedish. Not and. Um, but if you just punch into YouTube Days of French and Swedish, or Days of French and Swedish, it will come up. Um, yeah, it's only YouTube at the moment, so
Gotcha. Very interesting
yeah.
channel. I highly recommend it. And your style, your editing style, fascinates me. I have to learn a thing or two about that. Thank you so much again, Lamont. Have a fantastic night, because it's night in Australia and it's morning here. And I will see you soon here on YouTube.
Thank
Bye.
you, Luca. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Thank you.